Welcome everyone. My name is Katie Stockdale and I am the curator at the Sallie Ellis Davis House. Today we are going to be talking about oral history, specifically an oral history project that I did for the Sallie Ellis Davis House for an exhibit that is currently up there about the Carver School. So the first thing we want to talk about when we talk about oral history is why is it important? The reason why oral history is so important is that it is history on an individual level. We're not going to be asking people for the facts, although our hope is that they may confirm or deny facts that we've already gathered. We are asking for people's memories, their narrative story of their own life, which is tied deeply to their personal worldview. And this allows it to provide context for historical events through seeing how one person or several people, depending on how many oral histories you collect, saw the world at the time of that event. So this is individual history, and that is why it is so important to build relationships between yourself and your interviewee. It is deeply personal to collect oral history because people are sharing with you memories of events or other people, and in doing so, they are at the same time sharing their memories of themselves. These memories could have led to building their own views about themselves, like I mentioned earlier, about building their worldview. And this is because people do not remember things exactly as they happened. Everything that they remember will be colored by what they were thinking and feeling at the time and what they're thinking and feeling now. So it is deeply personal to ask people to divulge memories that can be part of their worldview, which is why you need a personal connection to build the trust necessary for people to trust you. For example, the first person who I interviewed about the Carver School was a teacher who taught there, Mrs. White. I got her name from another woman who had come to the Sallie Ellis Davis House and seen my exhibit on the Eddy School and was excited because I included a panel on Carver at the end of that exhibit. This woman had taught within Baldwin County. She taught special ed classes, and she taught a few of those classes at Carver. She didn't remember much about Carver because she wasn't there very often, but she was a part of several retired teaching groups within Baldwin County, and she was able to get me the name of several Carver teachers, including Mrs. White. Because Mrs. White didn't know me and didn't know the woman who connected us well, her answers were short throughout our interview. She did voluntarily tell me the story of her memories of Carver, and we did build a rapport through the interview, which resulted in additional anecdotes and even her providing me names of other people that I could talk to. This was a good interview and it provided me with a lot of useful information, but I do think that if she had known me before the interview, it's likely I would have been able to have a longer and more detailed conversation with her. Contrastly, both of the women who were suggested by Mrs. White gave me very long and detailed answers when I interviewed them, and one of them had even brought pictures to show me in the school and allowed me to take pictures of those pictures to use in the exhibit, which was just so helpful and such a wonderful, generous thing for her to do. And I believe that is because they are friends with Mrs. White, one still bowls with her, and trust Miss White. They were able to then confer that trust onto me, which made the process of the interview smoother because they already had built trust with me. I was specifically pressed for time in my interview, so I did not have time to meet people before the interview process, but if possible, do try to have several meetings, one or multiple, with your interviewees before you actually interview them so that they can get to know you and sort of get to build this trust before the actual interview itself, which can be an invasive process. Before the interview, either during these meetings or before you start out, you should spend time getting to know them and just share a little bit about yourself too, so that it's not just a one-way street. It's really best if you could be introduced to your interviewees through a mutual acquaintance. Best if it could be direct, this person reaching out and saying that you're looking for interviews, or maybe you're at an event and you could be introduced to them in person. But even just being able to call someone and say, so and so thought that you might be able to help me because you know all about this specific topic that I'm interested in, is helpful, because it makes the person feel like there's a community connection, so you're trustworthy, and also it singles them out as someone who has expertise, which is why you're interested in them, and that can make them feel good about themselves and also more confident and more willing to talk to you. So when you go to start your interview process, you do not want to jump straight into the questions, especially if this is the first time you're meeting the person. You want to really start the interview off with some small talk. And again, this goes back to just sort of building a relationship and also sharing a little bit about yourself. So if there does come a point where you can naturally relate to your interviewee, go ahead and share a small anecdote. Give a little bit about yourself so that we start this process of sharing memories and personal, well, not information, but personal feelings. And it's not just a one-way street. So you're building camaraderie. What you don't want to do is go off on like a tangent for 15 minutes. You don't want to hijack the conversation. But if you can do a quick little anecdote, for me, for example, when I was talking to all the teachers, I said to them, my mother is also a teacher. And so I, understand what the teaching process is like from her. And that was really helpful for all of them to sort of know that I had a connection to them as well. What you do want to do just at the very beginning, right before you get into the questions, is reintroduce yourself and your project and tell the interviewee specifically why you want to interview them as opposed to anyone else. And again, that just lets them know that they have the expertise on this subject and that they're important, and can give them a little bit of confidence as we're going into the interview. The most important part of your interview is going to be controlling your reactions. From the very beginning, you want to stay neutral. You want to keep people talking. So even if they say something that doesn't square with facts that you've already gathered or that you've learned from other interviewees, you don't want to correct them. So you have a few options for what you want to do here, because of course correcting them will make them feel bad and make them feel like they're misremembering. It'll lower their confidence. So what you want to do instead is one of two things. You can either just let them keep talking, accepting that memory is fallible and noting the contradictions in the notes that you're taking of your interview. And that's what I normally do. While I was interviewing the 3 teachers and 1 student who were at Carver, I asked them all about the layout of Carver. What did it look like? And they all gave me a general layout that they agreed on, that the first building at Carver was shaped like a T. After this, the facts started to diverge. Some teachers remembered extra wings that other ones didn't. Some teachers remembered rooms, more rooms in an area than other teachers remembered. One teacher remembered that music class had been held in a building that another teacher told me had been condemned for the entire time that she was there. So these memories could have been conflated from time that they spent at another school. It could have been that someone just simply misremembered, or it could have been I found out that the teacher who told me the building was condemned the entire time she was there, she actually had a break in her time at Carver. So she was at Carver for a few years, and then she left when her family moved and was gone for about 6 years before they returned to Milledgeville and she went back to Carver. So it could have been that it was during that 6-year break that they tried to hold a music class in that building, and then they decided that it wasn't working and stopped using the building altogether. That wasn't really important for me to sit down and say to one teacher, well, actually, this teacher told me this, or this teacher told me that, or this student told me that. It wasn't important for me to pit the memories of these interviews against each other because it wasn't a particularly important detail. They had all agreed on the general layout, and so I could put the general layout into the exhibit and then say that one teacher remembered it like this and another teacher remembered it like this. I could let those contradictions stand because people do understand that people remember things differently, and there might have been a little bit of truth in each memory that we can use to create the full picture of Carver. Your second option, if you do need to get a specific answer and you can't just let the contradiction stand, is that you can say, after the person has finished talking, after they finish relating that memory, you can say, I heard from so-and-so that it was actually like this, and then you can provide an anecdote from that interview. You can also include dates and statistics that might jog the person's memory and cause a new story so that they could go, oh, I did misremember, it was actually like this, and then tell you a new story. You do need to be prepared for the fact that that may not happen. They may not change their answer. And so this is where oral history can be seen as valuable, because if you ask 3 different people about an event, it's very possible that you can get 3 different and sometimes contradictory answers. Personally, I think this is the most important part about oral history. As long as it is accompanied with unobjective facts, you get the full truth of an event. If there was a protest, for example, in a town 50 years ago, and you want to collect oral histories of the event, people are going to see it in different ways. You can talk to business owners who might have thought that the protest was a nuisance because it blocked access to their shops. You could talk to restaurant owners who really loved the protest, really enjoyed it because it brought more people into their restaurant than they would have normally gotten in a day. You could talk to one person who attended and remembered the event being completely peaceful and relaxed. You could talk to another person who might remember that there was a police presence and tension. None of these memories are necessarily wrong. What these memories tell you is that the person who remembered a peaceful protest is comfortable around police and did not see their presence as a threat, while the opposite may be true for the other person. This leads you into the social makeup of the town at the time, who felt safe and who didn't. And now you have a larger view of the story and more context for the protest. You might get into, maybe there was lower tourism at the time, so restaurants were struggling and they really needed that extra boon. But because there was lower tourism at the time, the restaurant owners the business shop owners were getting lower business as well, and the fact that access was blocked was really frustrating for them. So it just sort of gives you an entire makeup of what is happening at the time. These contradictory answers actually do lead you to the truth. For example, I asked each of the 3 teachers that I interviewed about what they remembered from when Carver closed. One of the teachers told me that it happened very suddenly, that in the last year of Carver's operation, all the teachers were told it would be closed. Another remembered that they had a year and a half as notice. The third had actually served on the board to create a middle school for Baldwin County, which was to be located at the then Body Junior High, and she remembered knowing that they would be moving from Carver to Body in 1985 or 1986, which was about 3 or 4 years before the move actually happened. So again, this doesn't show that anyone was wrong. It shows that people who were more involved with the move to the middle school system found out earlier, and that the school kept the news from the main group of teachers, probably because they didn't know if the committee to form a middle school would even be successful. The difference in times of learning when Carver would close did change how the teachers remembered the reason for closing, or technically just changing the school from a junior high to a special education building. The teachers who knew the longest about the move remembered that the reason for the closing was because they were moving to a middle school. However, the teacher who found out with the least amount of time remembered that they said they were closing Carver because the building was too old, and they claimed that it was too old to be remodeled. It's likely that all parts of this are true. And that's why it's important for me to have presented every perspective. And what that really shows is that the lack of transparency with some teachers caused them to question the intent of the school's closing, which is almost more important than the actual reason why the school closed. No one was wrong here. Everyone simply interpreted their own experience of the event through the lens of their worldview. Using oral history combats one of the largest pitfalls in history, which is the danger of a single story. It's very easy to write a paper or a textbook or create an exhibit strictly from the facts and the people who gathered those facts. But these people are never everybody who was involved in a given event. And what held true for these people will not be the full truth. By using oral history, we introduce more sides of the event and present more sides of the truth. Getting to the full truth also involves asking the right kind of questions. So the questions that you should ask should be structured so that they're not a yes or no answer question. You want to create questions that will invite stories to be told. So that also goes in that you don't want to ask a super open-ended question. You don't want these questions to feel so wide that people are overwhelmed, and that might actually end up that they shut down and actually give you shorter answers because they don't know how to sort through their thoughts. So I learned that asking a very large question, which was, what do you remember about the Carver School? That did not get me a very long answer. The question, what do you remember the Carver School looking like, started off all of my interviews with very long stories that would go for several minutes. As they explained to me the layout of the school and the building materials of the school, and even got into the fact that the school didn't have air conditioning, and so they had to leave the doors open and leave the windows open, and because of that, cats and dogs would run through and chickens would come through, and that there were even bats in the ceilings. All of this came just from the open but specified question, what do you remember the school looking like? So the main other thing that you want to do is not ask leading questions. You want the structure of the story, but you don't want to point people into a direction that they may think means you want a specific kind of answer from them. You want them to give you the true answer, not an answer that serves you, because that doesn't serve you. So the questions that I asked were, what were students like versus were students behaved, and what kind of support did you get from the school system versus what was the support from the school system low. And this allowed people to go off really on long stories, to talk about the kids, to talk about their relationship with the school system and what they thought about it. I ended up asking Ms. White a question about sports at the Carver School. I wasn't sure. I thought that they might have had sports, and of course that would have been a gathering point for the community, so I asked about the sports that they had. They were junior high, so they actually didn't have organized sports. So she didn't have much to say on that question. She did mention Field Day, which was an event that they had held at Carver, but because it wasn't a direct answer to my question, she didn't give me a very detailed answer. If I had asked about recreation at Carver, I could have gotten a longer answer about Field Day, which would have been very important because Field Day was a big event for the school, and I got what I specifically asked about Field Day to the other teachers. I got very long responses about that day, and so it would have been better for me to have had an answer like that from Mrs. White as well. Of course, that's just a learning curve for me. So how do you start your interview? You start with establishing questions. So what I had everyone do was that I had everyone spell out their name, and then I asked them the years that they taught at or attended Carver. Then you need to start with just one question that you think might produce a very large, long answer that is really a story. And of course, mine was, what do you remember Carver looking like? After that, you can use your questions to just sort of direct the conversation. You don't want to control the conversation, but you want to make sure that you're pointing in the right direction. So you can ask, for me, after that question, I would ask them, what did you teach, or what do you remember being taught? And that sort of, flowed very easily in from what the school looks like, because they could move from talking about their classrooms to talking about what they taught. Then you can go ahead and finish. You don't have to, because this is a pretty open-ended question, so it goes against my previous rule, but it is a good idea to finish with, is there anything else you think I should know? Because that allows people to, if they thought that they had something they wanted to say but didn't really fit with any of the questions that you asked, they can go ahead and tell that story. This question does not always get responses, but it's a good wrapping up question because it allows people to really say if they want to, if they have something to say, it allows them the option to just tell a story. That is when the interview wraps up. So after this question, your interview is done. You definitely don't want to force the person that you're interviewing out, but you can go ahead and turn your recording off and just return to small talk as you start to walk them out. For me specifically, I held my interviews at the Sallie Ellis Davis House, and my exhibit on the Eddy School was up at the time. So I encouraged the people who I interviewed to view it and the house if they wanted to as they left. So what you want to do as sort of your little wrap up to your interview is a few days after, reach out again and thank the person that you interviewed. At this point, you can also provide a status update on their interview. If it's going to an archive, is it already up? Can they access it? If it's not, how far along in that process are you? If it's being edited for an exhibit, when will the exhibit be out? How can they see it? All of those sorts of things. So then it's on to the work that you have to do, which is going to be transcribing and editing your oral history. So the first thing that you need to do with your recording is transcribe it. That is paramount. You need to get it down immediately, and you need to transcribe everything. If you are working on an exhibit or you do need to display the oral history and you're on a time crunch like I was, you can sort of cheat and transcribe the parts of the oral history that you're going to need for what you're doing, and then edit those parts, do all of that first, put them out, and then as soon as that's prepared, go back and transcribe the full unedited recording. So how do you edit an oral history? You have a few options. First, you're going to want to edit out all of the tangents. They were really important for relationship building, but if they don't relate to your subject, they're not needed. For example, one of the teachers that I talked to, Mrs. Brock, went off on a whole tangent about how she now has a tourism sort of company, and she travels abroad very often, which was very fun and very interesting to talk about. Not important for the Carver schools, so don't need it. You can go ahead and preserve the question and answer format of the interview, or you can edit the responses into more of a narrative. And this is really just going to depend on how the interviewees responded. If they naturally reply with more stories, it's easier to create a narrative. If it sounds like they're responding to questions, you want to stick with the Q&A format, because people are just going to expect there to have been an answer or a question, and it might sound strange if it's just the answer. And all that's happening with the recording is that it's going to an archive. You don't need to edit it at all. So as soon as you finish transcribing it, you can just send it over and you're done. Once you finish editing and you get it up, you're done until you have another interview to do. So that is all that I have for you all. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.